Chapter 1. The first thing Julian Valerian did as Alpha of the Silverwood Pack every morning was something no Alpha in recorded history had ever needed to do: check whether his lorekeeper had left a scroll on his chair. Not a friendly scroll. Not a "good morning, here are the day's priorities" scroll. A citation scroll. Senna Kilich had a habit of finding obscure centuries-old pack rulings that happened to prove, with devastating, airtight historical precedent, that whatever Julian had done the day before was, technically, a violation of something. Today's scroll read, "Pursuant to the Accord of Winterthorn, 1463, no Alpha may allocate pack provisions for the purpose of festivity without a formal petition reviewed by the lorekeeper. You did not petition." The last Alpha who attempted to circumvent this process was Alpha Brennan of the Greymore Pack, who organized an unauthorized feast in 1743 and was subsequently charged by his own ceremonial elk. I trust you will find this instructive. S.K. Julian stared at it. Then he looked at Marcus Thorne, his beta, who was leaning against the doorframe with the expression of a man watching a slow-motion rock slide he could not stop. "She can't possibly be serious," Julian said. "A ceremonial elk." "She cited the page number," Marcus said, "and the elk's name. It was Gerald." "She made that up." "She never makes anything up. That's the terrifying part." Julian crumpled the scroll and tossed it toward the fire. His wolf, the part of his mind that was all impulse and warmth and terrible ideas, stirred with a thought that had nothing to do with elk. "She smelled like old paper and cedar smoke this morning. We noticed. We always notice. Why does she have to smell like that?" Julian ignored this, as he had been ignoring it for months. He found Senna in the lorekeeper's hall, a long stone room lined floor to ceiling with shelves that held scrolls, bound records, and leather-wrapped texts older than the packhouse itself. Morning light filtered through narrow windows, catching dust motes that drifted through the air like slow snow. Senna stood at the central table, a massive slab of scarred oak, 3 scrolls unrolled before her, and a quill behind her ear. She didn't look up when he entered. "The elk was real," she said, before he could speak. "I haven't said anything yet." "You were about to say the elk wasn't real. It was. Gerald of Greymore. There's a commemorative stone." She finally looked up, and the full weight of her attention landed on him like a thrown book. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, the kind of face that looked like it had been designed specifically to make people feel they'd failed an exam they didn't know they were taking. "Your festival proposal is denied, Alpha." "It's not a festival. It's a gathering. For morale. Our border patrols are stretched thin, the younger wolves are restless, and people need something to—" "The last time you organized something for morale, Tabitha Finch set the Eastern Smokehouse on fire with a signal flare she found in the armory. That was a bonding exercise. It was arson." Julian's wolf supplied a thought, warm and completely unhelpful. She remembered Tabitha's name. She remembers all their names. She pretends she doesn't care about the pack, but she knows every single one of them. He pushed it down. He was getting better at pushing it down. Or worse, depending on how you looked at it. "Senna," he said, trying for the reasonable voice that worked on literally everyone else in the pack. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm informing you, as a courtesy. And I'm informing you as the lorekeeper whose entire function is to prevent the Alpha from making historically inadvisable decisions, that you do, in fact, need my approval. It's in the charter, which you haven't read. I've read the charter. You've read the summary Marcus made for you, which omitted 46 provisions, including the one about festivals, the one about sovereign allocation of dried goods, and the one about the Alpha's obligation to consult the lorekeeper before any undertaking of significance." She tilted her head, the ghost of something that might have been amusement in her eyes. "I am being consulted. I am saying no." His wolf was doing something Julian found deeply inconvenient. It was paying close attention to the way her fingers rested on the edge of the scroll, the way her pulse was visible at her throat, the way she stood her ground like a person who had learned the hard way that giving an inch meant losing the room. His wolf didn't find any of this infuriating. His wolf found it magnificent. His wolf was, frankly, a liability. Tell her she's brilliant, his wolf urged. Tell her the way she just cited the charter from memory made our chest feel strange. Julian did not tell her. He said, "Fine, what do I need to do to get your approval?" "Submit a formal petition outlining the scope, cost, purpose, and historical precedent for the gathering. I'll review it within 3 days." 3 days. The full moon is in 5. "Then I suggest you write quickly." She turned back to her scrolls, a dismissal so clean it barely made a sound. "Close the door on your way out, Alpha. You're letting in a draft." Julian left. He did not close the door. It was the only rebellion available to him, and it was deeply unsatisfying. Behind him, in the hall, Senna stared at the space where he'd been standing. The room still smelled like him. Pine resin, wood smoke, something warm underneath that she had no name for. Her wolf, the part of her that was all instinct and heat and inconvenient truth, stretched inside her mind. You could have said yes. I could have said yes to a man who hasn't read his own charter, Senna thought back. That's not governance, that's surrender. You like him. I tolerate him, barely, under protest. Your heart rate increased 12% when he walked in, I counted. My heart rate is not your concern. Everything about you is my concern. Her wolf's voice was warm and fierce simultaneously, a blade wrapped in velvet. You are my human. You are brilliant and difficult, and you are going to die alone in this room surrounded by scrolls, unless you stop using dead men's words as a wall. He sees you, Senna. He's the only one who actually argues back. Everyone else just lets you win. Senna picked up her quill and went back to work. Her hand was not shaking. It was absolutely not shaking. Chapter 2. The rogue problem had been building for weeks, like a slow toothache. A scent here, a broken boundary marker there, tracks that appeared on the northern ridge and vanished before the morning patrol could log them. Small things, the kind of things an optimistic Alpha might call passing traffic. Senna was not optimistic. Senna had pulled every record of rogue activity in the Silverwood territory going back 200 years, and she did not like the pattern she was seeing. It's testing, she told Julian, 2 days later, standing across from him in his study. His study was a warm, cluttered disaster, mismatched furniture, a wolfhound named Brutus asleep on a pile of what appeared to be important documents, a cold cup of tea balanced on a stack of maps. The room smelled like him. She hated that she noticed. They're not passing through, they're probing. Testing how quickly we respond, where the gaps are, how far in they can get before we push back. Julian was looking at the map she'd brought, the one with her neat, precise markings showing the incursion points. His brow was furrowed, and for once, there was no easy charm in his expression. This was the other Julian, the one people forgot existed, the one whose father had led the Silverwood Pack through 2 border wars and raised a son who understood territorial strategy in his bones, even if he preferred not to use it. How many? He asked. 3 distinct scent signatures so far, possibly a 4th, but the rain on Tuesday compromised the trace. She set another scroll on the table, the historical record. In 1819, the Ashford Rogues used an identical probing pattern against the Thornvale Pack for 6 weeks before a coordinated attack on their eastern settlement. 17 wolves died. You're comparing this to the Ashford incursion? I'm saying the pattern matches. I'm saying we should not wait to find out if the outcome also matches. His wolf, which had been mildly sulking since the festival rejection, perked up at her proximity. She brought us a map. She did the work. She's trying to keep us safe. This is because she loves us. She doesn't love us, Julian thought firmly. She thinks I'm an irresponsible child who needs historical footnotes to make basic decisions. Yes, and she does the footnotes anyway, every time, for us. Julian looked at Sina, at the precise, careful markings on her map, at the dark circles under her eyes that told him she'd been up late researching this. The elders would have dismissed her, he knew that. Old Garrick and the others on the advisory circle still spoke about her predecessor, Alistair, in reverent tones. Alistair, who had served as lorekeeper for 40 years. Alistair, who had died unexpectedly and left the role to his 23-year-old apprentice, a girl half the elders thought was too young, too rigid, too much. Sina had been lorekeeper for 2 years now. She had not yet been wrong about a single thing. The elders acknowledged this the way you acknowledge weather, unavoidably, without warmth. "What do you recommend?" Julian asked. Something flickered across Sina's face. Surprise, quickly buried. He'd never asked her that directly before. Usually they argued until one of them won or Marcus intervened. "Double the northern patrols, stagger the shifts so there's no predictable gap, and move the boundary markers in by 50 paces. It narrows our perimeter, but creates a denser response zone." That's a defensive posture. What about... If you say, "What about talking to them?" I will cite you the Accord of Redfall, in which Alpha Whitmore attempted to negotiate with the Black Ridge Rogues and returned home missing 3 fingers and his dignity. Julian's mouth twitched. I was going to say, what about a scouting party to track their camp? A beat. Oh, Senna blinked. That's actually sound. Don't faint. I said it was sound, I didn't say it was brilliant. She almost smiled, his wolf reported. The corner of her mouth did a thing. We saw it. It was the best thing that has happened today. Julian organized the scouting party for that evening. He led it himself, because that's what his father would have done. Senna did not argue with this, which surprised him. She simply handed him a sealed scroll. What's this? The terrain survey of the Northern Ridge, annotated with every known rogue campsite from the last century, and the most likely current positions based on the scent pattern. Also, there's a ravine at the base of the ridge that doesn't appear on the standard maps. Alistair noted it in a margin annotation in 1847. It's the kind of place rogues use. Julian looked at the scroll, then at her. You already had this prepared. I prepared it 2 days ago. I was waiting for you to stop suggesting festivals and start paying attention. The jab landed, but gently. He could hear the thing underneath it, that she'd been worried, that she'd done the work before he asked, because she'd known eventually he would need it. Thank you, Senna, he said. He meant it. She stiffened, the way she always did when sincerity got too close. It's my function, Alpha, the lorekeeper provides. Consult the terrain notes on the ravine, and come back in one piece. I don't have time to train a replacement. He grinned. She didn't. But her wolf, deep inside her, sent a pulse of warmth so fierce it made her breath catch. Bring him home, her wolf said. Not to Julian, to the night itself. If anything happens to him, I will burn this forest to its roots. The scouting party found the ravine exactly where Senna's notes said it would be. They also found something worse. Julian crouched at the edge of a shallow depression in the rock, his torch throwing jumping shadows on the walls. 3 crude shelters, the remains of a fire still warm, and scent. Not 3 rogues, not 4, at least 8. Maybe more. Marcus knelt beside him, his face grim. This isn't a passing group. No, Julian agreed, his jaw tight. This is a staging camp. The warm, easy part of Julian, the part the pack loved, receded. What was left was the Alpha who had grown up watching his father study maps and make hard calls. the one who understood that warmth was a luxury you earned by keeping people safe first. It was also the part of Julian that carried a scar. Not a physical one, a memory. 3 years ago, a young wolf named Finn Harlow had come to Julian with a problem. His sister had been running with a rough crowd from the outer territories, wolves who weren't pack but weren't quite rogues. Julian had counseled patience, empathy, conversation. Give her time, she'll come around. He'd believed it, because Julian always believed people would come around if you gave them enough space to be good. 6 weeks later, Finn's sister was dead. Caught in a territorial skirmish between the rough crowd and a neighboring pack, a fight she should never have been near, but was, because Julian had given her space instead of a boundary. He'd been kind when he should have been firm. He'd trusted his heart when his head, and his lorekeeper, who had quietly flagged the outer territory wolves as a growing risk, had been telling him to act. He'd carried it since. The knowledge that his warmth had a body count. "We remember," his wolf said, quiet for once. Not dramatic, not petty. Just there, pressed against the inside of his ribs like a hand on a wound. "We remember Finn's face when we told him." Julian closed his eyes for a second. Then he opened them. "Marcus, I want sentries on this camp around the clock. Silent observation, don't engage, don't alert them that we know. I want numbers, patterns, hierarchy if you can identify it. Report to me and to Senna every 6 hours." Marcus nodded, already moving to relay orders. Julian stood and looked north, into the dark trees. Somewhere out there, 8 or more wolves with no pack and nothing to lose were planning something that would hurt his people. He was not going to give them space. He was not going to give them the benefit of the doubt. He had made that mistake once, and a girl named Kara Harlow had paid for it. He sent Marcus back with a scouting party and stayed. It was irrational. The sentries were posted, the observation points were covered. There was nothing for the Alpha to do here that his wolves couldn't do better. But Julian sat on the cold rock above the ravine and watched the dark tree line. And his wolf, for once, did not complain about the cold, or the distance from Senna, or the lack of anything resembling comfort. His wolf understood. They were keeping watch the way their father had taught them, with their own eyes, their own ears, the smell of the wind across their own tongue. The forest at night was a different country. Every sound carried a story. The creek below shifting over stones, the particular rustle of a fox threading through undergrowth, the absence of birdsong that meant a predator had passed through recently. Julian's wolf senses read it all without effort, the way a person reads a familiar room. He could smell the rogue camp from here, old smoke, unwashed bodies, the sharp metallic thread of aggression that hung over a group of wolves with no bonds and no trust. Packless wolves smelled different. It was something civilians didn't understand. A wolf connected to a pack carried the scent of belonging, layered, complex, warm. A wolf without a pack smelled thin, stripped, like a single note played without the chord. It wasn't just loneliness, it was incompleteness, and it made them dangerous in a specific way. They had nothing to lose because they had nothing to hold. Julian knew that smell. Kara Harlow had started to carry it those last weeks. The pack scent fading from her as she drifted further toward the outer territory wolves. Julian had noticed. He'd told himself it was temporary, that she'd come back on her own. He'd told Finn to give her space. He hadn't told Senna, who had already flagged the outer territory group in a quiet report he'd read and set aside, because it felt like an overreaction. 3 years later, Julian could still recite that report from memory. He'd gone back and read it after the funeral. Every line had been right. Every recommendation had been specific, measured, and exactly what he should have done. "We don't make that mistake again," his wolf said, and it wasn't a request. "No, we don't." He stayed until the sky began to lighten in the east, a thin gray line above the mountains. Then he climbed down from the rock, stiff and cold, and walked home through a forest that smelled like everything he was responsible for. Chapter 3. He made it back to the pack house just before dawn. The lamps were still burning in the lorekeeper's hall. Senna was exactly where he'd left her, surrounded by scrolls, quill in hand, as if she'd been sitting there all night. Because she had. She looked up when he walked in. Her eyes tracked him, all of him, the mud, the exhaustion, the set of his jaw that told her this was worse than they'd expected. She didn't ask if he was all right. She asked the right question. How many? At least 8, staging camp in the ravine, just where you marked it. It's occupied and recent. This isn't probing anymore, Senna. They're settling. She was already pulling a fresh scroll toward her, her mind moving faster than her hands. I'll draft the patrol rotation. I've already set sentries. He paused. Then, I used your terrain survey. The observation points you noted in the margin, they were exactly right. She went still. It was a small thing, an alpha telling his lorekeeper that her work was useful. It should have been ordinary. It wasn't, and they both knew why. Julian didn't just use her work, he acknowledged it. In the 2 years she'd held this role, the elders had taken her research, her analysis, her citations, and presented them as collective wisdom. No one said Senna found this. They said it was determined, or the records show. Her work scrubbed of her name. You're staring, she said, her voice a fraction unsteady. You were right. About the pattern. About all of it. I know I was right. I'm always right. It's why the elders can't stand me. The elders are, careful, Alpha, you need them. I need you more. The words came out before Julian could vet them through the part of his brain that managed diplomacy and self-preservation. They hung in the early morning air between them, too honest, too bare. Senna's wolf surged, not with warmth, but with something harder. Triumph, pride, a fierce, possessive joy. He said it, out loud, with his whole chest. Are you going to stand there and pretend you didn't hear that? Or are you going to— You need the lorekeeper, Senna corrected, her voice level. The role, not the person. It's an important distinction. Is it? Yes. She turned back to her scrolls. Go sleep, Julian. You're no good to anyone running on fumes and sentiment. He left. He didn't argue. But at the door he stopped. Senna. What? The ravine. You said Alistair noted it in a margin annotation. I looked at the original record. The annotation wasn't in Alistair's hand. It was in yours. You found it yourself and you credited your predecessor. A beat. Stop doing that. He was gone before she could respond, which was fortunate because she had absolutely no idea what she would have said. Her wolf, quiet for a long moment, finally spoke. He sees you. Not the role, not Alistair's ghost. You. Senna pressed her palms flat on the table and breathed. She would not let this matter. She was the lorekeeper. The role was the armor, and the armor was necessary, and she would not— You're shaking. I am not shaking. You are shaking, and you are lying to me, and I love you, but you are an absolute fool. The next 3 days were tense and precise. Julian ran the pack with a quiet authority that surprised people who only knew the charming surface. Senna ran the intelligence, compiling sentry reports into a pattern that became clearer with each cycle. The rogues were organized. They had a leader, a scarred, older wolf the sentries had identified as the one the others deferred to. They were building something in the ravine. Not just shelters now, defenses. On the second day, old Garrick found her in the lorekeeper's hall. He was a lean, silver-haired wolf who had served on the advisory circle for 30 years, a man whose respect was the currency of pack politics, and who spent it on Senna with the generosity of a miser. I've reviewed the patrol reports, he said, standing in her doorway with his arms folded. Not sitting, not coming in, standing at the threshold like a man visiting a room he didn't consider important. Your analysis of the rogue movements is thorough. Thank you, Senna kept writing. She knew what was coming. I've taken the liberty of sharing it with the advisory circle. We've made some adjustments to your recommended patrol routes. The southern approach is better served by a wider formation, and the timing of the shift changes should account for the river crossing at. The southern approach uses a narrow formation because the terrain funnels into a bottleneck at the ridgeline, Senna said, still not looking up. A wider formation would split the team across the bottleneck and leave the left flank exposed. I've annotated the geological reason on the map, which you'll find if you look at the margin notes you didn't read. Garrick's jaw tightened. Alistair would have welcomed the circle's input. There it was, the knife they kept in the same drawer, always ready, always sharp. Alistair would have. As if Alistair were a saint and Senna were the pretender who'd stolen his robes. Alistair would have agreed with my analysis, Senna said, her voice perfectly level, because it's based on the same geological surveys he catalogued in 1847, the ones I've since corrected for the landslide that changed the southern ridgeline in 1983, which Alistair did not live to see. Garrick left without another word. Senna sat in the silence and pressed her quill so hard against the desk that the nib bent. Her wolf was furious. Not on Senna's behalf. Wolves didn't distinguish between self and human that way. She was furious because someone had come into their space and tried to make them feel small, and the wolf did not tolerate feeling small. He took your work, again, repackaged it with his adjustments and presented it to the circle as a collaborative effort. Again. And you let him walk out of here alive. He's an elder. He has influence. Antagonizing him costs more than it gains. Everything is a calculation with you. Some things should just make you angry. I am angry. Good. Use it. They're not just settling, Senna told Julian, Marcus, and the senior patrol leaders later that afternoon, standing around the map table in Julian's study. Brutus the wolfhound had been exiled to the hallway. They're fortifying. They intend to hold that ground. If they establish a permanent position inside our boundary markers, it changes the territorial calculus entirely. Other rogues see it. Other packs see it. It signals that our borders are permeable, that we're soft. We are not soft, Julian said, with an edge she hadn't heard before. I know that. But the perception matters. Every pack within 100 miles will be watching how we handle this. So what's the play? Marcus asked. We can't ignore them. We can't let them dig in, and I'd rather not start a war with 8 wolves if the number's actually 12. 15, Senna corrected, as of this morning's count. The room went cold. 15? Julian repeated. 3 arrived during the night. They're recruiting, or consolidating. Either way, the window for a measured response is closing. In 3 days, maybe less, they'll be entrenched enough that removing them will require a full engagement. Julian looked at the map. Senna's markings covered it now. Patrol routes, observation points, terrain features, lines of approach. It was meticulous, beautiful work. It was also a map of a battle she was trying to prevent, by preparing for it so thoroughly that it became unnecessary. You have a plan, he said. I have a recommendation. Let's hear it. She took a breath. This was the part where, historically, things went wrong between them. She would present a detailed strategy. He would feel managed. They would argue. Nothing would get done for half a day while they circled each other like 2 cats in a sack. We hit the camp before dawn. A coordinated operation, 3 teams, simultaneous approach from the south, west, and the ravine's blind ridge. We don't engage unless they force it. The goal is to make it clear that we know they're there, we know their numbers, and we can reach them whenever we choose. It's a show of capability, not an attack. Julian studied the map. His wolf was doing something strange. It wasn't pining or sulking. It was paying attention. The animal part of his mind was evaluating her plan with a predator's instinct. and it was finding its sound. Good terrain coverage, escape routes accounted for, minimal exposure. She built this to keep our people alive, his wolf observed. Not to win, to keep them alive. That is the correct priority. Where do you want me? Julian asked. Senna hesitated. This was the part she'd dreaded. Leading the southern approach. You're the alpha. They need to see you, and they need to understand that the alpha of the Silverwood Pack doesn't delegate the hard decisions. And you? I'll be on the Blind Ridge with Marcus. Observation and tactical coordination. You'll be the most exposed. I'll be where I'm needed. Senna. The Lorekeeper accompanies the Alpha in matters of territorial defense. It's in the Charter, Section 12. A pause. And before you ask, no, I did not make that up. It was written by Alistair's predecessor in 1602, after an Alpha went into a border dispute without his Lorekeeper and accidentally ceded 300 acres because he didn't know the boundary terms of the original treaty. Marcus snorted. Julian's mouth twitched despite himself. Did the Alpha get the acres back? Eventually. It took 40 years and a marriage alliance. The Lorekeeper at the time described the Alpha in the official record as a man of great courage and no discernible memory. Even the patrol leaders laughed. Julian looked at Senna, this woman who could disarm a war council with a 600-year-old insult, and felt something shift in his chest that he could no longer pretend was just his wolf being inconvenient. It's not just us, his wolf said, quiet and certain. It's you, too. You know it is. Julian looked away. Dawn, day after tomorrow. Everyone knows their position. Get some rest. The room cleared. Senna began rolling up her scrolls. The Alpha in 1602, Julian said from the doorway. The one with no discernible memory. What about him? Did he ever figure out that his Lorekeeper was the smartest person in the room? Senna's hands stilled on the scroll. She didn't look up. The records are unclear on that point. I bet he did, Julian said softly. I bet he just didn't know how to say it. He left. Senna stood in the empty room, a scroll in her hands, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her wolf said nothing. Her wolf didn't need to. The warmth that spread through Senna's chest was its own message, and for once, she didn't argue with it. That night, Senna couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed in the room behind the Lorekeeper's hall, staring at the ceiling, running the plan through her mind for the 100th time. Every angle, every variable, every way it could go wrong. Her wolf, restless in the way that meant she could feel Julian's proximity somewhere in the pack house, even through stone walls, finally broke the silence. You're not going to find the mistake. There is no mistake. You've checked it 100 times because you're afraid, and checking is what you do instead of feeling afraid. That's not true. It is exactly true. You are terrified that tomorrow someone gets hurt and the elders will say it's because the girl Lorekeeper wasn't ready, that Alistair would have found a better way. Senna pressed her hand over her eyes. Here is what Alistair would have done, since you want to know. He would have written a beautiful letter. He would have quoted 3 philosophers. He would have recommended a diplomatic envoy. And by the time his letter was finished, 15 rogues would have been 25, and the southern settlement would be burning. A beat, edged with pride. You are not Alistair. You are better. You are the Lorekeeper who looked at the numbers and made a plan that keeps people alive. Now go to sleep, or I will make you dream about the Alpha's shoulders, and you will have no one to blame but yourself. Senna almost laughed. Almost. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes. Across the pack house, Julian was also not sleeping. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands. Big hands. His father's hands. Hands that had held Finn Harlow's shoulders while the boy shook apart with grief. You're thinking about Kara, his wolf said. Not a question. Always. Before something like this. Always. Kara died because a group of dangerous wolves were allowed to operate unchecked on the edge of our territory. Tomorrow, you are not allowing that. Tomorrow, you are doing the thing you didn't do 3 years ago. This is not the same. What if I'm wrong again? Then you will be wrong with the lorekeeper beside you. And the lorekeeper is never wrong. She has the scrolls to prove it. A sulky pause. She also has very nice eyes, and we would like to be closer to her at the earliest opportunity. But apparently that is not the priority. Everything is always not the priority with you. Julian lay down. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and restless. He dreamed of a gray wolf standing on a ridge, watching him with dark, steady eyes. In the dream, she was waiting for him to be ready. She had been waiting a long time. Chapter 4. Dawn came cold and sharp. The 3 teams moved through the forest in silence, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Julian led the southern approach, 6 wolves at his back, all of them tense, all of them trusting him. The weight of that trust sat on his shoulders like a physical thing. On the blind ridge above the ravine, Senna crouched beside Marcus, watching the camp below through the gray half-light. 15 wolves, some sleeping, some awake tending the fire. The scarred leader was among them, sitting apart, watchful. There, Senna whispered, pointing. 2 sentries on the western approach. Julian's team will hit their line of sight in about 90 seconds. He's good at this, Marcus said quietly. People forget. They see the smile and they think that's all there is. Senna didn't respond. She was watching Julian move through the trees below, a golden wolf now, massive and silent, and her breath caught against her will. He was beautiful in motion, she realized. Not the polished charm of his human form, something rawer. The way he placed each paw, the way the wolves behind him followed his line without hesitation. It was authority made physical, and it was earned, not performed. Now she notices, her wolf murmured, smug and fond, only took a territorial crisis. Then everything happened at once. Julian's team broke from the tree line in perfect formation. No howl, no roar, just sudden, overwhelming presence. The western team emerged simultaneously, cutting off the ravine's main exit. The rogues erupted into chaos, wolves scrambling from sleep, snarling, confused. The scarred leader was on his feet immediately. He was fast, faster than Senna had anticipated. He didn't run. He charged directly at Julian, a gray blur of muscle and fury, aiming for the alpha. From the ridge, Senna saw it happen in the slowed-down clarity that comes with terror. Julian met the charge. The impact was tremendous, 2 wolves colliding with a sound that echoed off the ravine walls. They went down in a tangle of teeth and claws, and for 3 horrible seconds, Senna couldn't tell who had the advantage. Her wolf screamed inside her. Not words, just a sound. Raw, feral. A thing made entirely of the understanding that if Julian went down, something in her would break that could not be fixed. Senna! Marcus grabbed her arm because she was already moving, already scrambling down the ridge toward the fight. Senna, the plan! The plan didn't account for their leader being suicidal, she snapped, and she was shifting, the transformation ripping through her so fast it burned. Her gray wolf was smaller than Julian's, leaner, but she was fast, faster than anything on that ridge, and she was running. She hit the ravine floor and didn't slow down. Julian had the scarred leader pinned, but a second rogue was circling behind him, teeth bared, looking for the opening. Julian couldn't see it. He was focused on the wolf beneath him. Senna slammed into the flanking rogue from the side, 130 pounds of furious lorekeeper hitting like a battering ram. The rogue went sprawling. Senna placed herself between the downed wolf and Julian's back, snarling, every hair on her body raised, a sound coming from her throat that she had never made before, a territorial, possessive, unmistakable declaration. Mine. The word wasn't hers. It wasn't her wolves, spoken to her. It was both of them, fused into one thing for the first time. Human precision and animal fury combined into a single, absolute truth. Julian's head snapped around. He saw her, gray and small and shaking with rage, standing over the rogue she'd flattened, guarding his back. His wolf went very still. "She came for us," his wolf said. Not with enthusiasm, not with drama, with a reverence that made Julian's chest ache. "She was supposed to stay on the ridge. She came for us." The fight ended quickly after that. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the rogues broke. The scarred leader, pinned and bleeding, finally went still beneath Julian's weight. It was over in minutes, though it felt like hours. Marcus coordinated the pack wolves to secure the captured rogues. The camp was dismantled, the wounded were tended. Julian, back in human form, moved among his wolves with quiet words and steady hands, checking, reassuring, being the alpha they needed in the way only he could. Senna, also back in human form, stood at the edge of the ravine, her arms wrapped around herself. She was shaking. Not from cold. She had abandoned her position, left the observation point, thrown the entire coordination plan out the window because she'd seen Julian in danger and her body had moved before her mind could stop it. The lore keeper who planned everything had planned nothing. She had simply run. "You did the right thing," her wolf said firmly. "I abandoned my post. I compromised the tactical overview. Marcus had to coordinate blind for 90 seconds because You saved his life. The rogue behind him would have taken his hamstring. He would have gone down and the scarred one would have had his throat. You saw it. I saw it. We acted. That is what we are for. That's not what the lore keeper is for. No, that's what his mate is for." Senna closed her eyes. The word sat inside her like a bell that had been struck and was still vibrating. "Senna." She opened her eyes. Julian was standing in front of her. He had a cut above his eyebrow and mud in his hair, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It wasn't charm, it wasn't warmth. It was something stripped bare, something that had nothing to hide behind. "You left your position," he said. "I'm aware. That wasn't the plan. I'm aware of that too. It was a tactical error. I'll note it in the record. You saved my life. She stopped. She had no scroll to cite, no precedent to hide behind, no dead lorekeeper's wisdom to deflect with. She had just a man standing in front of her, with blood on his face and something terrifying in his eyes. "There was a wolf behind you. You didn't see it. I made a judgment call." "A judgment call," he repeated. "Yes. Your judgment call was to personally throw yourself at a rogue wolf twice your size because I was in danger. It was the most efficient response available." "Senna," his voice cracked. "Just slightly. Just enough. Stop quoting your own tactical manual at me and tell me why you really came down from that ridge." Silence. The forest was quiet around them. The pack wolves were busy with prisoners and wounded. For a moment, they were alone. Her wolf said, "Tell him." Sina said, "Because I couldn't watch." 3 words, small, honest, and devastating. Julian's breath left him. "I have 17 historical precedents for territorial engagement," she said, her voice unsteady now, the wall crumbling faster than she could patch it. "I have the complete tactical record of every border action in 400 years. And none of it meant anything when I saw you go down. I am the lore keeper and I forgot every word I have ever read because you were hurt and I couldn't." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "This is extremely inconvenient." Julian laughed. It was a broken, exhausted, wonderful sound. "Inconvenient," he repeated, deeply. "Sina Kilic, the woman who has a historical precedent for everything, finds the fact that she cares about me inconvenient. I didn't say I cared about you. I said the situation was inconvenient. Right. They looked at each other. The distance between them was very small. The distance that was left had nothing to do with physical space. His wolf, who had been uncharacteristically silent since the fight, finally spoke. If you do not hold her hand right now, I am going to start screaming and I will not stop. I have been very patient. I have waited months. She just threw herself off a cliff for us. Hold her hand. Julian didn't hold her hand. He did something worse. He said, Sina, when we get back, I'm calling a pack assembly. She frowned. For what purpose? To formally acknowledge that the tactical plan that saved our territory was designed by the lorekeeper, by name, Sina Kilic. Not the record show, not it was determined, you. Because the pack should know who keeps them safe, and the elders can choke on it. The world went very quiet. Sina's wolf made a sound inside her that was not a word. It was older than words. It was the sound a creature makes when something it has been protecting for a very long time is finally safe. You don't have to do that, Senna whispered. I know, Julian said. That's why I'm doing it. Chapter 5. The pack assembly was held that afternoon in the great clearing below the pack house. The whole pack gathered, children, elders, the wolves who'd fought that morning still wearing their bruises and their relief. Word had already spread, the way it always did, through the kitchens, the patrol handovers, the quiet conversations between wolves who had been there and wolves who hadn't. The story of the battle had been told and retold before noon, each version slightly different, but all of them agreeing on two things. The Alpha had led from the front, and the lorekeeper had thrown herself off a ridge to guard his back. Senna could feel the shift as she crossed the clearing. People were looking at her differently. Not with the polite deference they showed the role, or the faint dismissal the elders had taught them by example. Something else. The young wolves from the Western team, the ones who had watched her sprint down a cliff face in wolf form and slam into a rogue twice her size, nodded to her as she passed. One of them, a girl named Wren, barely 19, still carrying a bruise on her jaw from the fight, caught Senna's eye and gave her a look of such straightforward respect that Senna almost stumbled. That's what it looks like, her wolf said quietly, when they see you. Not the title, you. Finn Harlow was in the crowd. Julian saw him, a quiet, steady wolf who had never blamed Julian for Kara's death, which somehow made it worse. Finn gave him a nod, solemn and sure. Julian held his gaze for a moment, a silent conversation that held more weight than either of them could have spoken aloud. Then he turned to face the pack. Julian stood at the front, looking more like the Alpha than Senna had ever seen him. Not because he was commanding, because he was honest. He told them about the rogues. He told them about the plan. And then he said the thing that made Senna's chest crack open. Every strategy that kept you safe this morning was designed by your lorekeeper, Senna Kilic. The patrol routes, the terrain analysis, the 3-team approach, the observation points that gave us the advantage. She did this work alone, at night, without recognition, because she believed it was her duty. I am here to tell you that it is more than her duty. It is her gift. And this pack owes her a debt that I, as your Alpha, am formally and publicly acknowledging. He looked at her across the clearing. The elders were silent. Old Garrick's face was unreadable. The younger wolves were murmuring, looking at Senna with new eyes. The lorekeeper is not a librarian, Julian continued. She is not a clerk. She is the memory and the mind of this pack, and she has been treated as less than that for too long. That ends today. He's doing it, her wolf said, fierce and shaking. He's actually doing it, in front of everyone. In front of Garrick and the others who never... Her wolf couldn't finish the thought. This is the grovel, do you understand? This is what it costs him. He's spending his authority on you. The elders will push back. The traditionalists will grumble. He knows, and he's doing it anyway. Senna stood in the crowd with her hands at her sides and her spine straight, and her eyes burning, and she did not cry. She did not cry because she was the lore-keeper, and the lore-keeper did not cry in front of the pack. She cried later, alone, in the hall, with the door closed. Her wolf held her through it, not with words, but with the steady, fierce warmth of an animal that had been waiting for its human to let something in. 2 days passed. The pack settled. The elders adjusted. And then Julian came to the lore-keeper's hall. Senna was at her table as always, surrounded by scrolls. But something was different. The rigid set of her shoulders had eased, just slightly. The hall still smelled of old paper and cedar, but it also smelled, faintly, of pine. She'd left the window open. She never left the window open. "You left the window open," Julian observed, standing in the doorway. The hall was stuffy. "The hall has been stuffy for 600 years. You've never opened it before." "I've never been aware of what the outside smells like before." His wolf, which had been building toward a truly epic sulk about the lack of physical contact since the battle, suddenly went very quiet. "She opened the window so she could smell us, even when we're not here." She opened the window. "I have something for you," Julian said. He walked to the table and set down a scroll. It was old, genuinely old, the parchment yellowed and brittle. "I found it in my father's things. It's the original appointment charter for the first lore-keeper of the Silverwood Pack, written by the first Alpha." Senna reached for it, her fingers careful. She unrolled it, her eyes scanning the ancient script. Julian watched her face, the way her lips parted slightly, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her entire being focused on the words with a devotion that most people reserved for living things. "Julian," she breathed, this changes the interpretation of 3 separate rulings. The original charter gives the lawkeeper concurrent authority with the Alpha on matters of territorial law. Not advisory. Concurrent. The elders stripped it down over the centuries. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm giving it to you. It's yours. It always should have been." She looked up at him. For once there was no wall, no citation, no precedent, no dead lorekeeper to hide behind. Just Senna, in a room full of old words, holding a piece of history that gave her back the authority that had been taken from her role long before she was born. "Why?" she asked. "Because the Alpha in 1602 eventually figured out that his lorekeeper was the smartest person in the room," Julian said softly. "And because I'm not going to take 40 years and a marriage alliance to catch up." His wolf, at this precise moment, decided it had been patient long enough. "That was very smooth, and I am taking full credit. Now please, for the love of every moon that has ever risen, will you—" Senna kissed him. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't planned. It wasn't backed by historical precedent. She simply put down the scroll, crossed the distance between them, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. And the sound that Julian's wolf made was somewhere between a howl and a sob of pure, vindicated joy. When they pulled apart, Julian's forehead rested against hers, and he was smiling, not the charming smile, not the Alpha smile, but the real one, the one that was just his. "For the record," Sina murmured, "there is no historical precedent for this." "Good," Julian said. "I'm tired of precedent." "That's the most alarming thing you've ever said." "I know." He kissed her again. Her wolf, deep inside her, stretched in something that felt like sunlight. "Finally," she said, proud and warm and edged with the same fierce love she'd always carried. "Took you long enough, brilliant girl." And Sina, for the first time in her life, did not argue. The Silverwood Pack settled into its new shape the way a river settles after a storm, finding the channels that worked, wearing away the ones that didn't. The rogues had been driven out, their camp dismantled, their scarred leader escorted to the neutral territories with a formal warning that Sina had drafted and Julian had delivered. The northern border was quiet again. The boundary markers were reset. The elders adjusted. Old Garrick, to everyone's surprise, was the first to come to the lorekeeper's hall and ask Senna directly for her interpretation of a water rights dispute. He didn't apologize for the years of dismissal. He didn't need to. The fact that he was there, standing in her hall, treating her authority as real, that was enough. Senna gave him a thorough, precise answer, and when he left, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Julian's festival finally happened. Senna approved the petition, after reducing the budget by 30% and adding a clause that all signal flares were to be locked in the armory for the duration. Tabitha Finch was placed on a watch list. They still argued. That would never change. Julian thought Senna was too rigid. Senna thought Julian was too sentimental. He wanted to expand the packhouse with an east wing. She pointed out that the last Alpha to build an addition without consulting the geological surveys had lost the wing to a mudslide in 1789. He called her impossible. She called him historically illiterate. Marcus watched from a safe distance and kept a tally. The well argument was the one the pack talked about for weeks. Julian wanted to dig a new well near the training grounds because the existing one required a 10-minute walk that interrupted sparring sessions and, in his words, broke the flow of combat readiness. Senna produced a water table survey from 1756 that demonstrated the aquifer beneath the training grounds was shallow, silty, and had caused the collapse of a previous well in that exact location. Julian argued that well digging technology had advanced since 1756. Senna asked him to name a single advancement. He could not. She suggested he consult the geological record before committing the pack to drinking mud. He suggested she try drinking something that wasn't the tears of long-dead cartographers. Marcus, who had been present for the entire exchange, later told the patrol leaders that it was the most entertaining argument he'd witnessed in 15 years of service, and that the Alpha had lost decisively in under 4 minutes. She had a map, Julian said when Marcus brought this up. She always has a map. How am I supposed to argue with a woman who has a map for everything? You could try reading the maps before the argument, Marcus suggested. Whose side are you on? The side that has maps. But underneath the arguments, something had shifted. When Julian made a decision, he looked for Senna's reaction first. When Senna found a precedent that changed the calculus, she brought it to Julian before the elders. They were not two separate leaders pulling in different directions anymore. They were a single instrument with two very different notes. And the sound they made together was stronger than either one alone. Julian's wolf, for the record, had not calmed down. He had simply redirected his energy from pining to smugness, a transition that Julian found almost worse. She's wearing her hair down today, his wolf observed one morning, as Sina walked across the clearing. She never wears her hair down. She is wearing it down because she knows we like it. This is a deliberate act, and I am documenting it. You don't document things. That's her job. I am learning. I am becoming cultured. For our mate, who is perfect, and who also made us a chart of the patrol schedules, with color annotations, and I have never been more attracted to a piece of parchment in my life. You need help. We need help. We are the same creature, and that creature is deeply, embarrassingly, irrevocably in love with a woman who just cited a 700-year-old treaty to win an argument about where to put the new well. She is magnificent, and I will not be silenced. Sina, crossing the clearing, felt the warmth of Julian's gaze on her back. Her wolf stirred, pleased and sharp. He's staring again. I know, you like it. I tolerate it. You wore your hair down. The wind was in my face. It was practical. You are a terrible liar, and I adore you. Now go tell him his proposed well placement is wrong. I have been waiting all morning to watch you destroy him with cartography. Senna didn't smile, but she did walk a little faster toward the Alpha, her lorekeeper's satchel swinging at her side. A 700-year-old treaty rolled inside it, and the knowledge, warm, certain, no longer frightening, that the Alpha of the Silverwood Pack would argue with her for the next hour, lose beautifully, and look at her afterward like she'd hung the moon. Their wolves knew. They had always known. They were patient and proud, and waiting for the bond that would come when it came. Not forced, not fated, just chosen, by two people who had finally stopped being afraid of the thing that made them better. For now, this was enough. The scrolls, the arguments, the morning light in the lorekeeper's hall, the Alpha who couldn't read his own charter, and the lorekeeper who'd memorized it twice. A pack, imperfect and whole. A home. And somewhere in the deep, shared warmth of two wolves who loved fiercely and without apology, the steady certainty that the best was still ahead.